There's a certain amount of satisfaction that comes through when you can actually say that we were right. Yeah, money eventually does talk and can change the market. Now we're seeing that 8GB graphics cards are gonna get less supply, probably because they're not selling that well at all. And this is something that we didn't think could ever happen because Nvidia or even AMD, they both can just make these graphics cards and people just end up buying them because they don't know any better. Now, I want to go through a bit of the history of how the heck did we get here that we've actually gotten to a point where we're changing the GPU market itself and the products that are being supplied and sold. So here is a Steam hardware survey, and you can see how many people, here's the VRAM capacity, how many people are on 8GB graphics cards in 2025 here, and about 33% of PC gamers are on 8GB cards. 8GB ones are the yellow ones, and then the blue ones are ones that have less VRAM capacity than even that. And this is for a reason. In 2025, 8GB graphics cards have tons of problems within games despite them being so freaking popular. And it's because they've been around for so long that these games need to use more memory at some point in time. Games need to get better, especially with this console generation. The consoles have access to about 10 to 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Just let me give you a reference point of how long 8GB cards have been relevant. You know, we go back to like 2617, we got the RX 480 from AMD, a mainstream graphics card that had 8GB. And this was 2016, and this was $230. Nvidia offered the 1070 at the time as well, had 8GB of VRAM, and this one is a little bit more expensive, $380, but still a mainstream option. So like even back 2016 and 2017, there was mainstream options from these companies that had 8GB, and at the time 8GB was absolutely overkill. But in 2025 things have gotten different. These problems started to arise and was pointed out even way back in 2020 when Hardware Unboxed went over the RX 6800 versus the RTX 3070 from Nvidia. Here's the RX 6800, which is a 16GB GPU, RTX 3070. As you see, they're relatively close in terms of performance, and when they came out, they're relatively close in terms of price, but it really was that doubling of VRAM capacity on the 6800 versus the 3070. So even back in 2020, Hardware Unboxed is pointing out this.
At 4K, the RTX 3070 starts to run into a VRAM capacity issue, as this game requires 9GB of VRAM using these quality settings at 4K, and as a result the 6800 extends its lead to 31%.
So obviously this was a pretty extreme scenario back in 2020. It was Doom Eternal 4K, basically maxed out. 8GB of VRAM was starting to become a problem because it required 9GB to do that. Obviously most people aren't playing the game like that. Even for reference, it's kind of crazy to see how mainstream graphics cards were absolutely crushing gaming performance in 2020. I mean, what's funny is this happened, and then back in like 2022, I'm pretty sure, Hardware Unboxed revisited the scenario with the 3070 and the 6800 because more and more games, this is 2023 actually, more and more games came out that were having issues. One of the major games that set off this alarm bell was Last of Us Part 1, because Last of Us Part 1, even though this game is so freaking old now, technically it's on like its third remaster, it had VRAM capacity problems even when you just went up to like high settings. But you know, for a game that didn't use any of the crazy technologies, it doesn't have ray tracing or it doesn't have any kind of dynamic lighting system, it still was having VRAM capacity problems, and that's because of like the texture detail and the optimization of the game. And when we saw the 6800 versus the 3070 in this title, yeah, it had a lot of problems. And then this also applied to a bunch of other games that came out in 2023. Games like Hogwarts Legacy, Resident Evil 4. Sometimes you play a game and the textures just don't even load in because it doesn't have enough VRAM capacity. It doesn't end up crashing the game, but you might get worse performance and the game looks worse. Obviously, over time, this is only becoming more and more of an issue. What's funny is back in 2023, we got to see this on full display. Yeah, $400, released the RTX 4060 Ti 8GB. This 4060 Ti was a flop in so many ways. I've tested both these cards. It is barely faster at all. Basically like not even an upgrade on the GPU, and it's cut down in so many different ways, but they didn't choose to give it more VRAM capacity. And it was still $400. This was a mid-tier graphics card that was already going to start struggling in modern games, and this was in 2023. This was completely destroyed in reviews. Freaking Gamers Nexus called it a waste of sand. I would just keep the beaches clean instead of making this graphics card. At the very least, if they weren't going to improve the performance that much with this generation, they at least could have given it more VRAM. What's funny, even funnier, like Nvidia's like god tier comedian at this point, because they did actually end up doing that with the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte. It's almost like a reaction. They knew people weren't going to be happy with the 8 gigabytes capacity on the first card. What's even crazier is they chose to charge even more for this card. All they had to do was basically glue some memory on the back of the chip for the 4060 Ti. That's what they ended up doing. Yeah, it changed the PCB design, but overall, is a pretty simple modification to give it more, actually double the VRAM capacity. And they wanted to charge $500, so $100 increase just for that small addition. I remember this card, like the 8 gigabyte one was bad, and then this one was crazy bad because it costed so much money for what you're getting. And it can be kind of hard to bash it for that because at least it did provide more VRAM, but especially at the time, the competition out there was cards like the RX 7800 XT from AMD also came out relatively soon after that, absolutely destroyed the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte in terms of performance, and they were the same price at $500. As we go on though, Nvidia also released the RTX 4060. It was an entry-level graphics card for their 40 series. They didn't make a card lower than this, which was actually a downgrade in memory capacity versus the 3060, and their performance was relatively similar, so like you actually just started to have problems on the 8 gigabyte version. But apparently Nvidia wanted to say that frame generation was worth everything here. I don't know if I agree with that. Now, over time, the 16 gigabyte 4060 Ti pretty quickly actually dropped price to only $450. Obviously, they were able to make that memory a little bit cheaper. They said it was $100 to add more memory to it, and that just probably wasn't true. But we were stuck on 40 series. You had to spend a lot if you wanted Nvidia to just get some decent VRAM capacity. AMD was a different story, but AMD didn't have some of the features that they have now. And that brings us up to RTX 50 series. And some rumors started to brew up that they're going to be doing the exact same thing again with the 5060 Ti. They're going to make an 8 gigabyte and a 16 gigabyte variant, which just kind of blows my mind. Like, that was a shit show. And they're going to be like, oh, we're going to do this again. Off the rip, it seemed like Nvidia saw that there was a growing sense of people not wanting to get the 8 gigabyte graphics cards and that there was going to be a negative reception on launch. What they did is that they didn't reach out to reviewers to get the 8 gigabyte variant of the 5060 Ti. You can see this from a bunch of different people like Hardware Unbox, even me, because I have some contacts with Nvidia, that you could not get these cards and have them reviewed before launch. They were only allowing reviewers to get the 16 gigabyte version of this card, but obviously that got a lot of negative press as Nvidia clearly was trying to keep something away from us. And when reviewers did finally get their hands on the 8 gigabyte 5060 Ti, it got absolutely freaking bashed. Instantly obsolete. Nvidia screws gamers. Gamers Nexus made a whole segment in their video about warning people about the 8 gigabyte version of this card. Like, oh no, this is pretty freaking rough. What is good, at least this time around, is there's only a $50 gap between the cards. As we saw at launch, people actually wanted to get the 16 gigabyte card because it honestly isn't that bad for the price point. So that card ended up being way above MSRP, more around like $480, so $50 on top of what it should be for a long time. It only is just starting to get back down to the MSRP today. It does make you wonder a little bit on what was Nvidia's plan with the 8 gigabyte card in the first place. It seems like it was all meant to be a trick from the very start to get people to accidentally buy the cheaper one. And the other theory that was going on is that Nvidia was able to work with their partners and make pre-built PCs and then put these things like the 5060 Ti from like this Alienware PC, other manufacturers, OEMs that make pre-built PCs are in this situation too. You'd be able to mark on the box that it'd be cheaper. You know, the PC would be cheaper. Buyers who buy pre-built PCs usually don't know a ton about their components. Just ask the average pre-built buyer. They might know what CPUs in their computer, but it's not that common a knowledge. So you could easily trick people into doing this. And what's really bad at the time too is, you know, we go out here and we think, oh, AMD has been somebody who offers good VRAM capacities. But what's crazy is after the release of the 5060 Ti from Nvidia, AMD went on stage and they announced the 9060 XT, which ended up doing the exact same thing. which just blows me away. And yeah, maybe there's reasons for this of why it's taking place today. I made a video about how chips are getting more expensive nowadays, and because of how memory and how capacities work on graphics cards, like they can only have so much of a memory bus width. So like if it's 128-bit, it can only have 8 or up to 16 gigabytes of VRAM, technically speaking, with normal memory that's out right now. So it does kind of make sense that there could be situations it's hard to get more than 8 gigabytes. So maybe you could give them some excuses, but I wish just the 16 gigabyte one was the only one existed. What's funny is that AMD did do the exact same thing. It had a lot of the same problems as the NVIDIA graphics card, but AMD did it. And then you skip forward a little bit. As these cards have kind of been out on the market, you start to see that they are not selling that well. The 5060 Ti and 9060 XT 16 gigabytes outsell the 8 gigabyte models based on Mindfactory data. And if we go down here and actually check out the numbers, clear, like it's obvious. Now, Mindfactory is a German retailer that I think is brick and mortar. So like people have to go in to buy these. So there is a little bit of a selection bias where people would be going into the store themselves. So they're probably a little bit on the more enthusiast side and realize that memory is a problem. And when you see numbers like this, 1,675 units sold versus 110, it's like 16 times more 16 gigabyte ones. It's cinema. And the 16 gigabyte 9060 XT, dude, that is insane. That is like 30 times more sales. AMD's model was $350, especially at launch. That's a really good freaking deal. And this data is backed up here. This is the same Mindfactory data that was around at the time. It does say that VRAM, most people are buying 16 gigabyte graphics cards. And here's the image that actually people are realizing just how important VRAM is in 2025. Like it's hard to go out there and invest into a card that is already on the chopping block. And anecdotally, from my own experience of going to like in-person stores and stuff, and even things that I saw online, you could see the 8 gigabyte versions of these cards just sitting and rotting on shelves. Like people were just not buying them. What's even crazier, what's poetic cinema, the 8 gigabyte ones, because they weren't selling, also had to drop in price just to get rid of them. This is fresh data today, you know what I mean? So here's a 5060 Ti. Again, it's supposed to be a $380 graphics card, going now for $340, $350. There's a lot of them. Very few of them are even going for the MSRP of $380. And you can go over to the 16 gigabyte one. Nowadays is actually at MSRP, not a bad deal for this price of $430, especially if you want an NVIDIA graphics card, in particular for the feature set and all that. And then you got the RX 9060 XT. This card was supposed to be $300, and I don't even know if AMD's profiting on these cards anymore, because you see 8 gigabytes versions of these cards for $260. This is a few months after launch, what, maybe like 4 or 5? That is crazy, man. Honestly, at this point, 8 gigabytes isn't as big of a deal. You know, depending on what games you play. If you're not playing high-end games at higher settings and higher resolutions, then honestly 8 gigabytes is okay in 2025. It's not going to age great. $260 is not a bad deal. That is obviously a big discount on the MSRP at $300. And then you see there's quite a bit of them doing this. Not even long after the launch of that card, a lot of them were instantly being discounted and couponed to $270. Even high-end models of the 8 gigabyte versions, like big coolers and stuff and all the RGB and all that, they were discounted like crazy immediately. And we just check out the 9060 XT, 16 gigabyte, $360. It's supposed to be $350 at MSRP. It's still going above that to this day, months after launch. Honestly, still a good deal at $360. That's what brings us to NVIDIA finally has realized this and is going to be making more of the 16 gig ones versus the 8 gig ones. NVIDIA is said to be limiting the supply of the 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte as 16 gigabyte model becomes the standard configuration. Obviously, most people are buying them, so I guess that just makes it standard. I think this is a leak though, so just take that into account. But some things I want to point out is that NVIDIA has realized that the sales of the 8 gigabyte one isn't as good, obviously, and they're accelerating the switch to producing more of the 16 gigabyte ones. So they don't have a bunch of units that are just sitting on shelves that they can't freaking sell. Like right now we see that they're dropping prices because they can't sell them. Now NVIDIA has woken up to this, but I'm not sure what AMD is thinking at the moment. We haven't really seen a statement about this. AMD is too busy basically trying to cancel their old GPUs and not support them anymore, that they can't be bothered with this 8 GB crap right now. Obviously, they've been discounting the price of their 8 GB 9060 XT, so they must know that's not selling as well as their 16 GB counterpart. But from the jump, apparently AMD was saying that the 8 GB one was not going to be the mainstream option, that it was just going to be available and is going to be in lower production anyways. And the sad part about this, the 16 GB ones still cost a pretty significant amount more, so it's hard to still justify wanting to pay even more just to get into PC gaming. It's kind of like we're playing into exactly what they want. They wanted to upsell us from the start, and guess what they're doing? Now we have to pay more money to get the freaking graphics card. You know, at the end of the day, that's how it ended up working out. It brings up some of the questions too. Is still the entry-level graphics cards from like Nvidia with the RTX 5060. The base 5060 is only an 8 GB graphics card, and so is the RTX 5050 at $250. Nvidia has all of these cards that only have 8 GB of VRAM. These are still going to be a problem for people. At the end of the day, it's not as big of a deal as you go cheaper. I think you can make more compromises on the actual product, because the 5060, for example, is a decently fast GPU. Like, it's really not that bad at the price point. It's just the 8 GB has a pretty major problem there. But it does bring into question is, what are they going to do about these cheaper price points? Like, are they able to actually bring more VRAM at these price points, or what is going on there? Now, Intel is the only one at a budget price point with the Arc B580 at $250, which is actually going a little bit below $250 right now. That has 12 GB of VRAM. So it has more VRAM capacity at a cheap price point, and I think that's freaking dope. The thing is, Intel is almost losing money on their Arc graphics cards right now. Like, it worries me that Nvidia and AMD, like, they might not be able to even do this at these budget price points. Now, the only thing that would make me believe maybe Nvidia could do this is because of the new memory technology that is coming around. We kind of mentioned earlier how the memory is structured on these GPUs. They have a 128-bit bus, and each chip for the memory needs 32 bits of that bus. 128-bit divided by 32, and you get 4 chips. So they have 4 chips, and each of them are 2 GB. Obviously, you get 8 GB of VRAM. And you can do a process technology where you put some memory on the back of the PCB, and you can essentially double that memory. That's how they're getting 16 GB while still being on a 128-bit bus. However, they're going to try to maintain this 128-bit bus because it's cheaper for them to manufacture. So Nvidia is in a unique position where if they're able to get higher capacity memory on their GPUs, they could up the memory capacity that is technically happening. So up to this point in time, we've seen rumors of the RTX 50 series Super graphics cards. There's supposed to be a 5070 Super, 5070 Ti Super, and a 5080 Super. And all of these cards seem like they're gonna have upgraded memory capacity by using 3 GB modules of GDDR7. This is the newest memory that's out there pretty much. It would be interesting if they were able to use this newer memory and bring it down to a graphics card like the 5060 and make a 5060 Super, turn that into a 12 GB graphics card instead of an 8 GB one. Nvidia in particular is the only one without expanding the memory bus width or adding more memory and changing the PCB design entirely, that they would be able to actually upgrade the memory capacity. AMD isn't on the latest memory, they're on GDDR6, and so is Intel. I've seen no rumors that an RTX 5060 Super is coming around, and I think that this is because there's shortages of this. And we see the RTX 50 series Super graphics cards, and honestly, a 5060 with 12 GB of VRAM would be a pretty damn good graphics card. It might have to cost a little bit more than $300, but these Super Series cards were supposed to start coming out. It seems like the rumors were leading up to January or Q1 of 2025, but it seems like they're going to get delayed because there is a VRAM shortage. Like, there isn't enough memory, especially on these consumer graphics cards. So right now, Nvidia also has their like Pro series cards, like the RTX Pro. There is a GPU out there that uses 96 GB of VRAM, and the only way that it could accomplish that is by using those 3 GB modules as well. They want to use that memory and put them on those AI graphics cards that are out there. Obviously, it makes sense for Nvidia. Also, their mobile chips with the RTX 5090 also use 3 GB modules. So it seems like Nvidia wants to prioritize those chips, these 3 GB modules of memory, to those products instead of just rushing them out all into the consumer graphics cards that are out there, because simply they don't have enough of them. And the same memory supply issue applies to even the current graphics card. This gives me a little bit more fear as well, because it seems like there's some rumors going out there. The RTX 5060 Ti 16 gigabytes, so this doesn't have the higher capacity memory chips or anything like that. And this rumor, they have a rating on here now that it's like 60% plausible or something like that. I'm not 100% sure. This isn't just affecting the 3 gigabyte modules. We can even see this right now, because if you've noticed that their system RAM prices have absolutely shot to the freaking moon, like memory on your PC just got way more expensive. Hopefully this doesn't start upping GPU prices again, because right now GPU prices have just started to come back down to earth, and I want them to stay that way because GPUs are not a bad deal right now. But overall, this has been a pretty interesting turn of events. So it took quite a while. Obviously, NVIDIA, AMD, and everything, they really wanted to make 8 gigabytes last on the consumer platform, probably because they would encourage you to upgrade relatively quickly when it couldn't really play the modern games, but also probably because it saves them money too. Like, memory isn't free. So there's obviously been some cost savings going on there. Is that greed, or is it just them trying to make a profitable business? We can't be 100% sure there. I think it's a little bit of both. It's cool to see how the market has reflected these products. Like, people don't want the 8 gigabyte ones because they want a GPU that's going to last them for the next few years in their games, and games are already having tons of problems right now. But I've really liked this turn of event. Good news for once, the market is changing. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully you can get more VRAM capacity, and it seems like gamers are speaking up, and apparently once money talks enough, the company's gotta listen. So I'm gonna see you guys in the next video. Y'all have a good one, and peace.